As I say, there are calls for the coalition government to cut the UK's financial contribution to the European Union. It comes as the European Parliament last week voted for a 5.9% increase in the EU's annual budget to around £115 billion, costing us an extra £884 million a year. Last week, we asked for your thoughts on the spending review, and a number of you said we should get out the EU.
The major costs of being in the EU are the distortions that it causes to trade. So from things like the Common Agricultural Policy and the Common External Tariff. Mm-hmm. Not the actual direct payments that you see.
Overall, in the long term, we would save loads if we were to leave.
At least 20 billion a year rather than 6.
Would there be a cost?
No, that's net.
David, do you buy that?
No, not necessarily. I think there's enormous economic benefits to being involved in the EU. To pull out would actually promote trade wars between countries, because they'd all instantly set up trade barriers, which would cost business in the long run.
Mark Reckless is Conservative MP for Rochester and Stroud, self-confessed Eurosceptic. I think you would describe yourself as that, on that end of things anyway. Good morning.
Good morning.
And Wayne David is Labour MP for Caerphilly, Shadow Europe Minister. Wayne David, hello to you.
Good morning.
The increase would cost the British taxpayer this nearly £900 million. A lot of money. I mean, it's 14,000 NHS doctors, 29,000 nurses, 34,000 police constables, 52,000 army privates. Why?
Well, that's just the additional increase over the increase that was already planned. It was already... To increase, I think this current year we're spending 6.4 billion as our net contribution, and it was intended that was going to go up to 10.3 billion in 2 years' time. 900 million's on top of that.
Sorry, I meant to put that question to Wayne David. I thought I had said Wayne David. It's an awful lot of money, Wayne David.
Yes, it is a lot of money, and that's why it shouldn't happen. And that's why I think the European Parliament is quite wrong, quite out of touch with reality, to actually call for this increase. We've got a long way to go yet in terms of negotiations. We'll have to see what happens at the end of this week. But certainly there should be no rise in the EU budget.
Well, you're agreed on that. Mark Reckless, for those people who think we should get out altogether, do you have a sympathy with that position?
Well, I think the issue is we just can't afford it anymore. We had, 2 weeks ago, we had a vote in Parliament, and 38 Conservative MPs voted to cut the budget, cut our contribution to the European Union. Unfortunately, it still went through because Labour MPs didn't bother to turn up. But what we have on this...
That's not true. We just didn't vote.
I think we should cut our contribution to the EU, and if the EU doesn't like that, we should have a referendum of the British people on whether to stay in or whether to be an independent country again.
An independent country, that's a motive language.
Well, I mean, we heard from your businessman just now when you asked him whether he wants to stay in the EU. He said what was more important was global markets, the United States and China, and I just don't think we should be paying 20 billion a year for the privilege of being governed by other countries. We should govern ourselves.
Wayne David, let's boil it down. What would we lose if we left?
Well, we'd lose a very, very important thing, and that is an association of our largest trading partners in the world. And the single European market is not just another market.
Sorry. Why would we lose that association? We're still here, they're still there.
Yeah. Well, the membership of the European Union means we've got free and open access to the largest consumer market in the world. If we pulled out of the European Union, we'd lose that access, because automatically, if we became a so-called independent country, we would lose that access to the single market, and that would be hugely detrimental to our economy and cost us thousands upon thousands of jobs.
I mean, that's just not true. I mean, if you look at Switzerland, if you look at Norway, they're not members of the EU. They have free access to the European market.
How can you compare Britain, one of the largest trading nations in the world, to small countries like Norway and Switzerland?
No, we're a much bigger and more important country, and we should be able to negotiate better terms than very small Switzerland and Norway can. And we want to trade freely with everyone in the world, not just Europe. We want much better trading relationships with the United States and with China.
That's right. I mean, we need good relations with all countries in the world, but I mean, our single most important trading partner is the rest of the European Union. And the way to look at this EU budget is a small membership fee to join the most important trading club in the world. It's a small price to pay, relatively speaking, because of the importance of trade to our country.
It's a huge price to pay at the moment.
It is, and we would carry on trading with those countries in any event. I mean, the common external tariff, I think, is only 3 or 4%, and I think it's very likely we would be able to agree free trade with the European Union in the same way that Switzerland and Norway do. Not least because they sell more to us than we sell to them.
I think our economy is too important to rely on a wing and a prayer. The reality is our contribution to the EU budget is less than 1% of our GDP. In real terms, in comparative terms, it's a small amount to pay for the access to this single market. And you talk to most employers in our country and they think that pulling out of the EU is simply crackers.
I'm afraid our
Is it crackers? Well, I'd be fascinated to know what our listeners think about that. 85058. What do you think public opinion thinks, Mark Reckless?
Well, I mean, the latest poll we've seen on this was that 48% of people wanted to leave the European Union and only 33% wanted to stay in, and our membership fee is now substantially bigger than 1% of GDP. It's going up from 14 billion to 19 billion in gross terms. But it's not just that, it's all the other costs on our economy that are imposed. We have to buy our food from expensive European markets rather than from much cheaper markets overseas. Almost all our fish reserves have been destroyed. We have to pay child benefit to 80,000 children who have never visited the UK and are resident elsewhere in the EU. Now, that is just wrong at a time of such financial stringency.
We have to leave it there, unfortunately.